Session 86, Surah Fatiha, the Qur'an summarized. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with the name of Allah, who is most gracious and merciful, and Nahmaduhu Nusalli ala Rasulihil Kareem, and praises and blessings on Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the last and final prophet. We continue with Surah Fatiha, and in that verses 6 and 7 of the surah, Sirat al-lazina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghzubi alayhim, walazwaleen. Ameen. The path of those whom you have rewarded, not the ones who earned your annoyance, not those who went astray. And we continue with Surah Yasin. Now today, first verse 41 onwards. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa ayatul lahum anna hamalna zurriyatahum fil fulkil mashhun. Translation: and yet another manifestation for them of the prowess of their Rabb is how we carried their race through the flood in the laden ark, carrying the children and the old, the pairs of all birds and animals. With reference to Noah's ark, Allah reminds the mankind of His great favor of providing the wood, that's boats, and other vessels with buoyancy that floats, carries the mankind, and transports the heaviest of loads through floods, rivers, canals, and oceans. Verse 42. وَخَلَقْنَا لَهُم مِّن مِثْلِهِ مَا يَرْكَبُونَ. And we created for them, enabled them to prepare and use their boat-like things, vessels, crafts, etc., which they mount, use for traveling and transporting. Man's misery can easily be visualized if he had to live in a world without buoyancy through water. If rivers and seas were non-negotiable, if fishing could not be effectually prevalent, and if nothing could float in the flood waters, and water obstacles were absolute barriers, 45 Surah Al-Jasiyah, verse 12, refer to Surah Jasiyah, verse 12. Translation only: it is Allah who has subjected the sea to you, that ships may sail through it by His orders, bounty, and that you may be grateful, Continuing with Surah Yasin, verse 43. وَإِنَّا شَأْ نُغْرِقْهُمْ فَلَا صِرِيخَ لَهُمْ وَلَا هُمْ يُنْقَذُونَ. If we intend, we can sink, drown them all, and there'll be no Messiah at all when they implore for help, and no one to rescue, bail them by overmatching the Rabb, the all-omnipotent. Verse 44. Illa rahmatam minna wa mataan ilahin. But because of our mercy, we fend off troubles in the seas in the ordinary way, and help them to live up to the appointed time. Verse 45. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ اتَّقُوا مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَمَا خَلْفَكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. The fact Allah assists man to live up to the appointed time makes the disbelievers arrogant, self-indulgent, and fanatically disobedient. And when they are warned, asked to save yourselves from what is coming ahead, the day of accountability, and from what you have left behind, and from what you have left behind, that is your evil deeds, so that Allah takes mercy on you. Contrarily, they display blatant effrontery, shamelessness, rudeness. Verse 46. وَمَا تَأْتِيهِم مِّنْ آيَةٍ مِّنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ إِلَّا كَانُوا عَنْهَا مُعْرِضِينَ. And so, there is not a single revelation from the revelations of your Rabb which they do not transgress, disobey. Nothing is effectual with them, for they remain negatively perceived. Nothing is effectual for them, for they remain negatively preconceived, and they give reasons for their disobedience. I repeat, and they give reasons for their disobedience. Verse 47. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَنُطْعِمُ مَا لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُ إِنْ أَنْتُمْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. For example, when they are asked, spend some on fellow human beings in alms and charity of what Allah has provided you. The disbelievers retort the believers, should we feed those whom Allah would have fed himself had he so desired? You are obviously clearly mistaken, wavered from the right track. The disbelievers inadvertently convey their belief that Allah is the sustainer and not any other associate like angels, idols, Jesus, etc. However, in an odious, hateful mania of controverting the inescapable truth, and with an intrinsic defiance of Allah's directions, they overlook that Allah feeds His entire living creation, birds, animals, insects, reptiles, and all living things in the oceans directly. There are no poor or rich among them. It is only with the mankind that Allah has desired social and economic codes of conduct. People interact with each other so that men are put to test. Verse 48. وَيَقُولُونَ مَتَى هَذَا الْوَعْدُ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Further, addressing the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the believers, these numbskulls, it is stated, these numbskulls, the disbelievers of the hereafter, say, inquire tauntingly and satirically, when do you think will this promise of resurrection actualize, if you are so truthful? When do you think will this promise of resurrection actualize, if you are so truthful? Till then, let us joke around. Verse 49. مَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَّا صَيْحَةً وَاحِدَةً تَأْخُذُهُمْ وَهُمْ يَخِصِّمُونَ. In fact, They are simply awaiting just a single terrible sound blast, the first great bugle at the 0 hour, which will grip them, pulverize, annihilate them when they'll be busy fighting each other. Verse 50 فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا على أهلهم يرجعون. Excuse me. The mankind at that hour would instantaneously be as if just extinguished. The mankind at that hour would instantaneously be as if just extinguished. Then neither would they have time to make a will, nor be able to return, to their families. The human dead would lie scattered like moth. The human dead would lie scattered like moth. This would be followed with a period of cold winds, storms, and rains on the earth. The light of the sun is arranged through a chemical process on its surface that is taking place continuously. It will come to an end on the doomsday when the sun would first be totally extinguished and then fission out and fall when what the astrophysicists call the second great Big Bang will occur. It will come to an end on the doomsday, I repeat, when the sun would first be totally extinguished and then fission out and fall, when what the astrophysicists call the second great Big Bang will occur. 82 Surah Al-Fatir, verse 1 and 2. When the universes split on the orders of their Master, Allah, the Almighty, when, by the will of Allah, the galaxies, planets disintegrate, for these are all bound by the desire of their mighty Lord. After the first great bugle, the winds, storms, and rains would be used to reassemble the dispersed constituents, particles, ashes, etc. of every man's body, for Allah sees where every particle is dispersed. If he had so desired, he could adopt the apparently easier course as per human intellect and effectuate man's resurrection using other particles and dust. But mankind would be exhumed, dug up from the graves as trees, using the same recollected dust, particles, ashes, etc. At the same time, the entire universe would be reshaped into the gardens of heaven, the fierce hell, and the stretched out earth to accommodate the entire mankind for accountability, and the stage set for the second great bugle. And hell and the stretched out earth, I repeat, to accommodate the entire mankind for accountability, and the stage set for the second great bugle. Verse 51. نفخ في السور فإذا من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون. And then the second great bugle would be blown. All souls would re-enter the bodies instantaneously, then no wonder they would instantly stand alive from the graves, ready to converge towards their Rabb. Mankind would yet be gathering feet and trying to adjust and orientate itself to the absolutely draconian new environment when the earth would suffer unimaginably severe, repeated earthquakes and swinging jolts which will foment scares and send shivers through the marrow, which will foment scares and send shivers through the marrow. The earth would push out all its minerals and treasures. Verse 52:8, Kalu Javalana Mam 52a, Kalu Javalana Mam Basana Mimmer Kadena. Lamenting, they would say, Oh, curse us! Who has raised us from the graves? They would feel they were better off in the grave. The earth would also throw out the bodies of those who had died at a time closer to the first great bugle. Mankind that had decomposed, calcinated, or cremated would be raised as trees grow. At the second great bugle, when they'll all be about 35 years old, their souls would re enter them. At the second great bugle, when they'll all be 35 years old, their souls would re enter them. The earth would display all his deeds to every individual who would be overstung in utter surprise and dismay and convinced that he is now doomed. The earth would display all his deeds to every individual who would be overstrung in utter surprise and dismay and convinced that he is now doomed. He will realize there is no way to evade the tragic end of the elegy, the mournful poem of his life. The mournful poem of his life. Expecting some miracle, he'll ponder what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? 52b, Haza Mawad Rahmanu was Swadakal Mursalun. They will be told, this is what you had inquired about. As to when would the promise be actualized if you are so truthful. Verse 48, covered earlier, but just before. And then, as a soliloquy, they'd say to their own selves, this is it, the doomsday, which the Rahman, the exceedingly kind, had promised, and the prophets had conveyed the absolute truth, and the prophets had conveyed the absolute truth. Abdul Rahman bin Zayd Raziullah Ta'ala Anhu, as quoted in Tafsir Ibn Kasir, Allah, the exceedingly kind, had forewarned the mankind about this day in all possible, feasible ways that he considered appropriate. I repeat, he stated, Allah, the exceedingly kind, had forewarned the mankind about this day in all possible, feasible ways that he considered appropriate. Abu Huraira Raziullah Ta'ala reported that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said, people would be gathered moving in three categories, classes. People would be gathered moving in three categories, classes. The ones who love Allah, the close ones, and those who fear Allah. Two riding one camel. And four people would be on one camel, and 10 men on one camel. The remaining people would be converged, gathered by the fire chasing them. The remaining people would be converged, gathered by the fire chasing them. Where they'll take the afternoon nap, the fire would also take the afternoon nap. And where they would halt to spend the night, the fire would spend the night with close to them. Where they would initiate the morning, the fire would also initiate the morning with them. Where they'll have the evening, it will have the evening with them. Muttafiq alayh. The third great bugle would mark the order for the punch-drunk, dazed, stupefied mankind to be pushed and chased to the vast area on earth, earmarked for it to stand and wait for the ultimate accountability. By the time they are ordered to move, every man would have seen his scrolls. All the parts of his body would have disclosed his sins, and finally, his heart would have spoken out the real motive of all his deeds. And finally, his heart would spoken out the real motive of all his deeds. Thus, before he goes to be produced, before his master, the king of all the kings, every man would have seen all his deeds along with irrefutable evidence about each and every act provided by 4 to 5 different agencies, both external as also from his organs. Lest the muttaqeen, the elevated ones, and the people of the right, who would not be chased, the majority of the mankind, that is the people of the left, would be at the run when it will also be further bifurcated, subdivided, according to the precise commonality of sins, evils committed, misdeeds, and evils committed and misdeeds. Having divided the mankind into believers and the disbelievers, the foremost criteria dividing line would be on the basis of resemblances. I repeat, having divided the mankind into believers and the disbelievers, the foremost criteria, dividing line would be on the basis of resemblances. The Prophet, peace be upon him, stated, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Every man, that is, every man would be raised with the people he resembles. Every man would be raised with the people he resembles. In brackets, it resembles in belief, values, in morals, intellectual orientation, appearance, dress, etc., etiquettes, customs, habits, likes and dislikes, and choices. I repeat, every man will be raised with the people he resembles, within brackets, in belief, values, in morals, intellectual orientation, appearance, dress, etc., etiquettes, customs, habits, likes and dislikes, and choices and styles. Musnad Ahmad. The Prophet, peace be upon him, took pains to ask his followers to differentiate themselves from the Jews and the Christians, that is, the non-believers. The Prophet stated that the Jews divide their hair on the head from the left, and the Christians divide the hair on the head from the right. We shall divide our hair of the head from the center. He also stated that they have one festival annually. We shall have two festivals annually. Ibn Taymiyyah states that if a person is in doubt as to whether this act is of Sunnah or not, he should see the Jews and the Christians, the non-believers, and do just the opposite. This is something which a Muslim must be very particular about, to follow the Prophet, that is, to follow the Sunnah. And following the Sunnah solves all the problems, and he really becomes a true follower of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and practically shows his love and respect for the Prophet. For Allah said, Atiullah wa atiur Rasul, obey Allah and obey the Prophet. May Allah enable us to follow this through the core of our heart at all the time, all the places, and advise and ensure that our children also do so. That's all for today. Please pray for me, ex-Brigadier Mustansir Billah.